In this Rise of Kingdoms video, I want to go over the very best legendary commander investment order. This video will be designed to help players that are just starting the game figure out what they want to do over the course of their gameplay and what they would do if they enter the Season of Conquest. So stick around in this video for the recommendations that I would give to a player who's starting fresh and trying to figure out which commanders should I work on. Hello, my friends, and welcome back. I'm Chisgule Gaming, and this video has been sponsored by the makers of Rise of Kingdoms, and I have been playing Rise of Kingdoms pretty obsessively for 3 years. I've been wailing out on this game. I have access to pretty much any commander that I want to go and max, and from that experience, I want to give you some advice on where you would focus your sculptures, because not only do I have this account where I've gone a little bit crazy, but I also have another account. This is my 88 million power restart account, which has been through KVK seasons 2 and 3 2 times now. I actually did a migration back to experience it yet again. So I've got a lot of advice I can give based on my experience here on which commanders you should be working on and why. Now, there is 2 commanders that I'm going to just start the video and throw it out there for you. Everybody who is not yet in the Season of Conquest, if you're going to your first season of KVK or second or third, the first 2 commanders that you should put your universal legendary commander sculptures into is going to first be expertising Isong. Yep, take them all the way to expertise, and then work on, hopefully expertise, Alexander the Great by the time you get to Season of Conquest. Even if you don't max Alexander the Great, he's still really good unmaxed. Between the 2, the priority is to max Isong, because when you do, his circle AoE is just absolutely insane. And these 2, as it turns out, are a top tier combo. Together, it will set you up for success in fights where you can only bring 1 march. And yes, that is a thing, where at the Altar of Darkness and Ancient Ruins in KVK Season 3, this is a zone where you can only have 1 march at a time. Alex Isong is that best march that you can assemble for those fights. And in case you were wondering, like, what marches do I use in the open field? In KVK Seasons 1 through 3, I really like the combination of Alex with Isong, Charles Martel with Sun Tzu, and also Ethelfled with Bjorn. I actually have used these combos myself, and they're working really well for me. It's not like God tier, but if you're not spending, those are some great marches you can bring. The majority of those commanders will not be maxed if you're in, KVK Season 2 or 3. And I'm going to talk about gold key commanders in just a little bit to review for you how you would consider using them both pre-Season of Conquest and post-Season of Conquest. The other commander I actually do need to give an honorable mention to for bringing to the open field is going to be Mehmed as a secondary to a commander like Ethelfled. That actually is a lot better than I've sort of given it credit for historically. And now that we have the ability to relic commanders later on, I'll talk about that later, he does get really, really strong in the end game. Now, if you were a spender before the Season of Conquest and you got access to a little bit more, you might have a maxed Minamoto, which I think is actually quite strong these days for the open field. Not the best of the best, but for the price is, you got to pay, but is pretty good. And then also you might have access to something like a 5-5-1-1 Saladin. Those are 2 investments that if you were to make them in advance of getting to the Season of Conquest, it'll give you a jump start on a bunch of the recommendations that I'm ultimately going to make. A heavy spender might have a few additional commanders maxed out, like, for example, they might have Richard I, or they might have Constantine or Tamaris. And really, only Constantine and Tamaris are going to bring a lot of punch for you in the Season of Conquest. Tamaris is a little bit limited on who you could pair her with, although her poison's very good. And then Constantine, who, I've got him somewhere in my roster, but you can see I have not really put any sculptures into this commander. That is because I don't, at this moment in time, in the meta we're in, think that he would be a top tier commander to use in the open field. Although, if you care a lot about Canyon, he is just amazing in Canyon and is one of the essential building blocks for a top tier team. But other than that, the majority of the commanders that you get, besides the ones I've just mentioned, are not all that important for your sculpture spending priorities when you get to the Season of Conquest. And on that note, there are a few trap commanders that I would encourage you to not put your universal legendary commander sculptures into, because those are too precious to use on the following. And I'm going to start with gold key commanders, because you can get them from gold keys. And then once you have maxed one of those commanders from gold keys, every time you get one of their sculptures from a gold key, it's basically waste. It literally isn't doing anything for you. So I would rather use the universals on other commanders. Unless you're a whale and you're garrisoning or rallying, that's a different matter entirely. We're really talking about legendary commander investment for the open field here. Charles Martel is a great commander, but I wouldn't be pumping universals into him. A commander like Mulan is actually a great commander, but I wouldn't be pumping universals into her either. Even Mehmed, I would not be using universals on commanders like that. Save them for projects where you don't have the option of getting them from a gold key. Similarly, I think that Richard I is a little bit of a trap investment. Super leveraged, super worth in like KVK Season 1 and KVK Season 2, even KVK Season 3. But once you get to Season of Conquest, he is going to fall off really fast. You'll be able to use him in Canyon for a while, and some number of people consider maxing the first 2 or 3 skills and using him like that. I generally like to only invest in commanders that will have value to you in the end game, so I'm going to argue that he's a little bit of a trap to be investing universals into. The other 2 commanders that are like fully traps, at least as of this moment in time, are going to be Edward of Woodstock and Khan. Do not invest in either of those commanders. Not your gems, spinning the wheel for them, not your universal legendary commander sculptures. Neither of them will be strong enough to really make muster in the Season of Conquest. This, of course, brings us to what commanders do I invest in, Chisgule, when I actually get to Season of Conquest. You can see a lot of my commanders right now are actually locked because they're Season of Conquest specific commanders that I can't use because I have migrated back to KVK Season 2 and 3. However, what I would recommend that you start with, and I have used this extensively on all of my accounts, is going to be Alex and Esong. I told you that these are the first 2 you should max. You use them together, that's your starting point. I think the next commander that you need to go and max is going to be Nevsky. In fact, let me jump to my main account. A lot of people will argue that this commander is the very best in the game, and every skill on him is amazing in the open field. You will not regret maxing Nevsky. There's just no way. Not at this moment in time in Rise of Kingdoms history. He is, again, one of the best commanders probably in the game, and you can pair him with either a relict Mehmed, Double C, or Minamoto. I'm not saying that's a perfect march. I'm saying I want to get you rolling with more marches very quickly when you get to Season of Conquest, and to take Nevsky while you're working on him, get him to at least 5-5-1-1, and then you could start using him. And you can drop on the back end a commander that is fine, not perfect, but fine. Relic Mehmed is actually crazy good. And the really crazy thing about these relics is that you can apply them without having the commander maxed, which is nuts. So for those of you not familiar or not yet in the Season of Conquest, you will get this building called the Museum. The Museum is incredibly strong. You will get currency when you enter into KVK and from daily quests that enables you to get this 100% free to play. So you don't have to sweat it. You'll have to wait until your pop happens for your KVK Season 4, but then you'll get a bunch of these materials, and the commander that I think you've really got to do is almost certainly Mehmed, or if you maxed your Minamoto, I would use that instead, or if you, well, I hope you didn't max your Double C, you could use that. I think the best unmaxed commander option, though, is going to be a Relic Mehmed. Dropping 20% health and 5% skill damage on a Nevsky is just fit. It's just really good. I was going to say fantastic, but I use that word way too much. So that's going to be my recommendation for your first extra march. I guess it's your second march. You have Alex Esong, and then you have Nevsky, probably with Relic Mehmed. From there, I'd really like to get you into a Guan. And some people will argue that maybe Guan should be the higher priority. Either one of these will be a fine starting point. But Guan is probably the next commander you work on if you didn't pick him first, and you try to get 5-1-5-5. Realistically, I think most people just end up maxing him. And your immediate choices for bringing him into the field, if you wanted to right away, you just put Sun Tzu with him as the secondary. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm just saying if you want to get going, and I imagine you do, to get some skills on the Guan and then drop it in the Sun Tzu secondary, you're in great shape. Other viable secondary commanders would include like a 5-5-1-1 Leonidas, who I have mentioned in other videos. I'll have the card up in the top. Leonidas is probably one of the best 5-5-1-1 commanders in the game, even still. So I think that's a great recommendation for a starting point. You also could use a Relic Mehmed. The 20% health on Guan is really good. The AoE damage from Mehmed is really good. The boosted skill damage from Mehmed is really good. And although you will eventually want to make your way into probably a Guan with Alexander the Great combo, the problem with jumping into it right away is that then you're breaking up your E-Song with Alexander the Great March. And so I don't think you want to split those up, because then you're stuck using like a Relic El Cid, and an E-Song primary is a little bit over-targeted compared to other things. So it's just a little bit risky to try to split the Alex with E-Song yet. I think it's a good idea to split them. I just don't think you want to split them just yet. And that gets you to 3 marches that are really good. And if you wanted to really focus on archers, or when you're ready, your next priority for a commander to go work on is very simply going to be a 5-5-1-1 Nebu. I mentioned this as well in my video about what are some of the best unmaxed commanders. And Nebu at 5-5-1-1 is really good, and then you pair with E-Song. That's how you ultimately free up your Alexander the Great to go other places. You can use Nebu with E-Song, and that's building you toward what is one of the very best marches in the game. That is Nebu with E-Song paired together. I also have that video detailing the best marches of the game. Card will be up in the top for that one. And I have a lot of videos explaining this stuff. So you could do Cyrus or Ramses instead of Nebu, but I think you ultimately want to build toward this best march. The only downside with using Nebu is that you've got to get him from Mightiest Governor or from the Legendary Tavern. You have to basically get a little bit lucky to get this unlock, is what I'm trying to say. It's not so easy. But a commander that you should work on next that is really easy to get is going to be William. He comes from the Wheel of Fortune. You can use him unmaxed, and he'll be really, really good. And arguably, one of the last marches that you go and work on for your murder ball is going to be something like Trajan with Ethelfled. And the reason I really like that is that not only is it a very, very effective support march, but also the Ethelfled is basically free to you to start using as a secondary. It's a max legendary that's very easy to get. And so you could do that once you get your Trajan up and running. Or some people just like to use a commander like Richard with Ethel, since they invested in it earlier. Or they might use Charles Martel with Ethel. That also would be pretty reasonable. I'm not saying these are the best marches in the game. I am saying if you want to get up and running very quickly with a lot of marches in the Season of Conquest, you got to use the tools at your disposal. And that is something that's at your disposal that I think works pretty good. I personally use Trajan Ethel on my restart. I've been very happy with it. I only have 3 marches, so I'm being a little bit of a team player, buffing a lot of other people. I would say probably your better bet is to pick Trajan only as a 4th or 5th march, ideally 5th march, to go and invest in, at least at this point in the Rise of Kingdoms meta. Now, if you wanted to go all in on infantry, and you said, Chisgule, man, I'm all in infantry, buddy, then your starting point is obviously going to be Guan Yu. Get to a 5-1-5-5 Guan Yu, and just pair with Sun Tzu, and continue to use your Alex E-Song. I also really like, again, investing in Leo. And then from there, your 3rd march is going to be that Charles Martel that I've been talking about. You can use him 5-5-1-1 or better. You drop the Relic onto him, very important, once you get to Season of Conquest. And then you use either Ethelfled, Sun Tzu, or Joan of Arc, depending on what other commanders you've been investing in. You could also deploy a Relic Mehmed with your Guan, and I think that's a great way to free up Sun Tzu to be behind Charles Martel. And I actually like those two paired together, because Charles doesn't really have any talents to generate rage, and Sun Tzu actually generates a bunch of rage. That would be my recommendation for some quick infantry marches getting into Season of Conquest. If you wanted to do archers, this actually gets weirdly a little bit more tricky. There are a lot of really great archer commanders, but I think your starting point is going to be that same first combo I mentioned, Nebu with E-Song. That's a great starting point. From there, you probably still need a way to use the Alex you have, and you just smash Sun Tzu with Alex, and that's really easy. So you have your Alex and Sun Tzu as one of your extra marches if you already invested in Alex. You've got your Neb E-Song going, And then the next march you would work on to get you to 3 marches is probably Cyrus and Ramses. And it took me a minute to think about that and go, like, what actually would be a really great march? But Cyrus paired with Ramses has some of the highest single target damage that you can find, especially from archers. And they have really a lot of debuffs, a lot of synergy. I can recommend that extremely highly. And you can, of course, weave in a commander like Relic Mehmed. In fact, I think you'll need to while you work toward this. So you might start with Cyrus and Relic Mehmed as a pairing. I'm not saying it's the best pair in the game. I'm just saying that that's a fine starting point and using the tools at your disposal to get something up and running kind of early on. So again, to run that by you, the archers you would focus on if you wanted to be an archer-focused account would be Neb with Esong. You still have Alex and Sun Tzu because that was basically free to you. Then also you probably work on Cyrus with a Relic Mehmed. The intention would be to put Ramses in there at some point, or you could split up Cyrus and Ramses and make a couple marches using like Relic El Cid and Relic Mehmed. Those are other options that you've got that gives you a pretty quick start with archers. And last but not least is the cavalry. If you wanted to focus on cavalry, and I can't blame you because Nevsky is just so ridiculous right now, then I think after you have your Alex and Esong, which again, I think everybody should be working on, from there, when you get into Season of Conquest, Nevsky is your first focus. And when you work on Nevsky, I think that you use a couple options as a secondary. You either smash the Relic Mehmed because you have it, or you put your Expertise Mina, if that's something that you have because you've been spending. And your last option would actually be to use an XY. XY as a 5/5/1/1 is really good. And you don't have to use him as the primary because he'll get focused a lot, although you could make him primary. There's pros and cons to that. I think he is, as a march, a lot stronger with him as the primary, but you're going to get focused a lot. That's the downside. Your second cavalry march is going to be Saladin with Ethelfled. This is very easy to do because the Saladin, you can just stop at 5/5/5/1. And then the Ethelfled, of course, is just free to you at this point. You are missing a little bit of the active skill damage and march speed reduction and healing cut, but it's not that big of a deal. And then if you wanted to get that third cavalry march up and running, here's what I would recommend to you. I would recommend that you use Nevsky. Ideally, you max him with a 5/5/5/1 William. William is just a top tier commander. His instant proc damage, his debuffs, his buffs are all just so good. So if you can get into Nevsky with a 5/5/5/1 William, you can use Saladin with Ethelfled, and you can use XY, even just 5/5/1/1 with a Relic Mehmed. And that also does not need to be a max Mehmed, by the way. I'm just talking about get it to like 5/5/1/1, hopefully all from gold keys, probably all from gold keys, and then just put the Relic on there and you're good to go. And you still have Alex with Esong, by the way, for the open field. Those are even commanders that you could split and put other places, but I would make the argument that at some point you've got like 3 cavalry marches there. You'll want a dedicated infantry march. You'll want a dedicated archer march. It's always easy to get the infantry march because you could just use Alex and Sun Tzu. Not the best march in the world, but still really good. And then you just need something for your Esong, and you're in a great spot. Some people use Saladin with Esong, but I've never been too much of a fan of that. Given that this is a fine way to use your Ethel, I think that's probably what you should do. But at this point, I think I've probably talked enough about what the best combos would be if you're just thinking ahead and trying to figure out what should the order be. And new commanders come out all the time, so when a new infantry commander comes out, maybe this order will change. But for now, Nevsky is so overpowered that I really would put a lot of focus to him at the start. So you max Esong and Alex before you even enter Season of Conquest, ideally. And then once you get there, you max Nevsky, you work on Guan, you can work on Nebu, and bonus, by that point, you'll have to decide if like William and Trajan are things that you still want to do based on how the meta's changed. If you enjoyed this video, throw a like on here, consider subscribing. I will update this pretty regularly, so if you want to know if this changes or what that new order looks like, be subscribed so you can find out when I release the new video. And if you want to see me battling with the commanders I was describing in KVK Season 2 or 3, I'll have a card up in the top so you can check that out. And until next time, you have fun smashing your enemies.